A key component of the modern world economy, the chemical industry delivers products and innovations to enhance everyday life. It is also an industry in transformation, where chemical executives and workers are delivering growth and industry-changing advancements while responding to pressures from investors, regulators, and public opinion. Discover how leading companies are approaching these challenges here on The Chemical Show. Join Victoria Meyer, president of Progressio Global and host of The Chemical Show, as she speaks with executives across the industry and learns how they are leading their companies to grow, transform, and push industry boundaries on all frontiers. Here's your host, Victoria Meyer.
Hi, this is Victoria Meyer. Welcome back to The Chemical Show. Today, I have a special treat for you. I have joined forces with the Women's Energy Network for a podcast swap. So bringing you an entire episode that's going to be aired both on the Chemical Show podcast as well as the WEN podcast. In today's episode titled Power Networking with Women's Energy Network, I am joined by three incredible guests from the Women's Energy Network, which include Beth Kreller, Kara Byrne, and Maggie Taliska. So they're going to be sharing their insights and experiences on a variety of topics, including the importance of culture in companies, the value of networking and membership, and the challenges and opportunities we face in the energy transition. You're going to hear from Beth, Kara, and Maggie, and myself as well. And we have a great conversation. And one of the key things that we talk about over the course of this episode is the power of networking, the impact of finding a supportive community, and how each of us have gotten involved in podcasting. Stay tuned, listen in, and I think you're going to really enjoy this episode of The Chemical Show and the WEN podcast.
Hello, everyone. Beth Kreller here. Welcome to this episode of the WEN podcast and The Chemical Show. To switch it up a bit, we have a podcast swap for you as Kara Byrne, Maggie Taliska, and myself share the mic with Victoria Meyer, host of the Chemical Show podcast. Since we are introducing both podcasts to new audiences, we wanted to take a moment to share a bit about each of our podcasts. Kara, why don't you start by telling us a bit about the WEN podcast?
Sure. Thanks, Beth. The WEN podcast is our virtual arm of programming for the Women's Energy Network, aka WEN. Our purpose is to share industry information, knowledge, and leadership tips from women and men across the world who are working in and advocating for energy. This year, we are celebrating the energy industry by diving into powerful leadership journeys, emerging technologies in energy, and providing an alternate resource for professional development. I'm excited because this is our first collaboration with another podcast besides the WEN podcast, and it's with one of WEN Houston's executive members, Victoria Meyer. Thank you for joining us today, Victoria. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Chemical Show before we get kicked off?
Thanks for having me to be part of this. I think it's great for us both to be swapping podcasts, as they say. So the Chemical Show launched in 2021, and it gives a voice to leaders across the chemical industry and serves as a space to showcase innovation, insight, and great leadership. Each week, I interview executives from across the industry talking about some of the key trends that we're all facing: supply chain, sustainability, digitization, and more. And really just to get a chance for how different leaders in different companies are tackling some of the same challenges we're each facing. So far, we've published 120 episodes, and we've got more to come.
So as I understand, Kara and Victoria were fortunate to connect on LinkedIn, even though they probably could have done it easier if they'd both just attended a WEN Houston executive event at the same time. After some discussions, we thought there'd be a natural overlap in topics that we cover in our podcast. And from that collaboration, we decided to do a joint podcast so we could each get a different perspective on the conversations we've been having separately. I'm excited to learn more about the Chemical Show today, but also to reflect back on our journey through the WEN podcast season so far.
Well, and I'm excited to be here as well. So, one of the places we're going to start is with origin story. I've been in the chemical industry in really downstream energy for my entire career at companies including Shell, Clariant, and a predecessor to LyondellBasell, and really just got interested in the industry, fascinated by it. And then a few years ago, launched my own business called Progressio Global, where I go back and I consult with executives in chemical companies to help them execute their strategies in a more customer centric and effective way. And then 2 years ago, started the Chemical Show. And then this year, we are launching a conference called the Chemical Summit. Somewhere in this whole journey of energy chemicals has been part of my heritage and my career. And as I said, I really like to start each episode with your origin story. So let's do this. I'm going to start with Beth and just say, what's your origin story? What got you interested in energy and what's kept you here?
So I don't have a very linear path into energy. I am a native of Houston, Texas, and so I joke that I tripped into the energy industry by accident. Working in the energy sector was my second career. I enjoyed the corporate culture of my firm at the time and opportunities to collaborate with amazing minds on exploration and development projects. I never turned down a career challenge, especially when challenges took me completely out of my comfort zone. I always wanted to travel the world, and I did. In support of deep water drilling campaigns, I crawled across pipe and completion strings to tally up inventory on site in Southeast Asia, North and West Africa, the Middle East. I rotated through the firm's internal audit organization, and I developed supply chain tests where we optimized vendor spend and contract management. I investigated fraud, sometimes resulting in heated situations. I dabbled in revenue accounting, supply chain management, and I ultimately moved into a corporate risk role that supported all of the offshore portfolio. Enjoying the constant spirit of innovation, collaboration, and working everywhere from Northwest Europe to South America, I forged amazing relationships and continue to learn. My career journey continues in my current role, where I enjoy convening and connecting industry leaders to enable best business practices and holistic risk management. Like many chances you take in life, the risk of failure in exploration drilling is pretty high. You need to learn to have a realistic risk tolerance, be willing to fail, and learn from failure before you succeed, which is a common theme across energy.
You are correct when you say it's not linear, Beth. I'm just letting you know that, Beth.
And I'm third path now?
I'm interested to hear what Maggie has to say, because I think it's a little bit more linear, but not quite. And I also know some of the stories, so I like to.
Yeah, because if you're an avid listener of this podcast, Cara and I were on season 1 where Cara interviewed me. I don't know the episode, but it was Your Network is Your Net Worth or vice versa. But Cara interviewed me on my career journey and also my involvement with WEN and how it helped progress that. If you haven't heard that, here are the Cliff Notes. I have a couple degrees in chemistry, yet I do hate to cook. But I've worked in power and energy for over 20 years. I started in fuel cells and then transitioned into batteries. Pivoted quite a few times in energy. It might be a little bit more linear than a roller coaster, and I'm terrified of adrenaline. But I've been in various roles and experiences, including sales, operations, product development, and now I have a great job in operations and maintenance for the big girl batteries, or the battery energy storage systems that are currently operating in the ERCOT market very successfully, I might add. What I've learned through all of this is learning never stops. Always have to be evolving, always growing. Soft skills are my thing, and they're just as vital as hard technical skills. I've migrated companies, functions, roles with mostly with ease, I say, or at least I try to look like I have ease. But being a jack of all trades made me one heck of a shapeshifter, and life will throw you curveballs, as it has in my case, between family and health. I won't say challenges, but things that just kind of get in the way and you have to deal with. But I've been pretty well rounded to help give me what I think is an edge. So been there and done that. It's been a wild, somewhat linear, more linear ride than Beth. Got my limbs attached, but scars to show for it.
Victoria, you're getting better Cliff Notes than I got the first time around. I'm just letting you know.
Notes. Yeah, absolutely.
So my Cliff Notes, I did not know what I wanted to be when I grew up, except for I wanted to be an astronaut. The closest I've made it to that is I've gotten to Houston. And that's about it. And I have friends that work at NASA, and I watch their careers and envy them, but then realize I would not have been happy as an astronaut, or not an astronaut, but working at NASA in general. My attention span is too short. So I was sent to engineering camp way back in high school because somebody thought I would be good at it. My physics teacher way back then. I went to the University of Wisconsin, and there, that was where the engineering camp was. I got exposed to all different types of engineering. And I had so much fun that week that I decided that was going to be my major. I declared mechanical engineering within the first 6 months of being at the school. I got out in 4 years, and I started to work on big rotating pieces of equipment. I went into a company where we built large diesel engines, and the purpose of the diesel engines was to do either marine propulsion. And when I say marine, I mean submarines. So that was kind of cool. The first assignment I ever got was shock testing and just analyzing shock testing. And the second assignment was electromagnetic interference. So I'm just saying there was some really weird lab type things that I was doing in that engineering role. I did rotate into lean manufacturing then immediately thereafter. I was in a rotational program and broke the program because I wanted to see what I was designing being built. I wanted to understand how it was built so I could explain what I was selling a little bit better. From there, I went into, as everybody knows who listens to the podcast, I went into GE, and I've spent my entire career with GE, now turned into Baker Hughes. It's always been in the energy sector of it. I worked on mega LNG projects. I worked on turbo expanders, always in a sales and commercial role. So an application engineer, always adding contract or commercial management on top of it. So I would start learning the technical side, then expand out to the business side and be able to bridge the explanation or the negotiations of the contract for both sides. So I'd talk to the buyers and I'd talk to the engineers who were designing it. Still do that today, except now I lead a team because I realized I was really good at making that bridge. And I learned that paying it forward and making good business people out of engineers means that the engineers can eventually take over the world. That's my whole theory in life. So we will be there. We will be taking over the world. But that's just because there are engineers out there that can speak, that can actually tell a story and be really good business people at the same time because they can understand the technical risks that are involved along with the contractual risks of what we're selling. And then that loops in also the environmental risks and everything else about the entire energy solution that we're providing out there. While I may not have extreme lessons learned, I do learn that being in this role, teamwork makes the dream work. And I will say that till I die. It is my hashtag. And I'm a master of all trades and a jack of all trades. And depth as well as breadth is really important when you're learning different roles. What about you, Victoria? I think that one of the things that I'm interested in is you are part of the WEN Executive Network in Houston. We are both part of it. And I think we've met each other maybe once in person, maybe.
Right.
We will meet each other this year. That is our goal in one of the upcoming events. But
I'm looking forward to it.
exactly. All of us have had WEN impact us in some way, shape, or form. I just want to know a little bit about how and why you got involved with WEN, what made it stick, and then we can also talk a little bit about it as well. But I think that for me, WEN has really impacted my career because I was able to try some leadership stuff before I was a people leader. I've been volunteering for WEN for over 10 years, and I've gone local to the chapter, up to global. I've run a small business as president. So I got exposed to a lot of the stuff that maybe my company, being part of a large corporation, I wasn't able to do. What does WEN bring to your life?
So my WEN journey is not seamless. First got exposed to WEN probably at least 20 years ago and went to a luncheon or two with some colleagues. But it was weird because I never actually felt invited to join and to be part of it. And I think part of this is maybe I've always been downstream. I'm a downstream chemicals person unabashedly. And so I thought WEN was interesting. There was a lot of great people around, but it didn't seem to fit into my world, my business, what I was doing personally. It's about 25 years ago, though, I think in part of the pivot is started my entrepreneurial journey with my own business, was also just a lot more confident in terms of where I was. I decided to give WEN another try, right? So there was some luncheon, or I went to a luncheon or two downtown Houston. And the topics were interesting. I wanted to get to know the people. But the thing that really impacted me was meeting a person, which was Susie Knight. I happened to be there chatting. And she's like, hey, who are you? And we chatted. She's like, you need to come join the executive group. And I'm like, what executive group would that be? And she actually encouraged me to apply for executive membership. And once I got in, I was like, oh my gosh, this is my people. I found a really thriving network of executive members who look like me, talk like me, facing some of the same things. We can encourage each other, we can laugh together, and we've really built a great relationships. I think to me, it's just one of these lessons learned that timing is everything and that you have to give things multiple tries because you show up at an event and the event may not stick, but then you show up at another one and it does. And so for me, I really like the fact that one, we've got just a great variety of strong women in the organization, both at the executive level and across all of WEN, navigating some of the same challenges, coming together to learn, to grow, to develop, and really to make a presence. Because I know many times I have been the only woman in the room. You guys have been the only women in the room, I'm sure. And so it's nice to know that you're not the onlys in a bigger construct.
We are the only women in this room today, but that's okay.
That's true today.
Today, exactly. And that's the beauty of WEN too, is we get to feel the flip side of it. I think it's funny because 2018, I was actually WEN Houston's president. And Susie was also the person who brought me into WEN way back in 2013. So just FYI, we have a lot more in common than we even knew about Victoria. But one of the beautiful things I've also recognized about WEN is that WEN is across 25 different chapters now and ever growing. We have more on the horizon. And so I was able to meet Beth and Maggie, but Maggie first through many virtual events when we went COVID. So Maggie, what about you? What has WEN brought to you besides like a whole new career?
Because if you go back again to that episode, you'll hear that how I kind of used WEN to really, get to know my new company. So I interviewed them as they interviewed me. But I came into WEN, it's talk about being the only woman in the room. I was at a Battery and Brews event, which should have been a Battery and Bros event. And I love the story that I was networking in the women's bathroom with probably the only other woman there. And she was part of WEN Boston. So she talked about it and, I joined that night. Fortunately, Allison from WEN Boston followed me around the first thing and said, we need you, to join the board. And, I had the communications part down. I'd been writing for Axios, their expert voice series. And I used WEN, like Cara was saying, to try something new. And I applied for the marketing and communications. I figured, okay, I got the comms down. Why not try the marketing? And it was a wonderful experience. I feel like I learned how to be a marketing person. So much so that then Cara came to me and voluntold me that I would be the marketing director for the conference. And I think I did an okay job at that. So yeah, using WEN to hone new skills, to try new things. I'm always trying to hone my finance skills. So the last year I was part of WEN Boston, I was their treasurer just to, again, get more exposure to that in a non-work setting. But due to COVID, a lot of us had moved up north of Boston. And if you're not from Boston, even if you move 5 miles outside the city, it can take 2 hours to get to the city. So with that, we did found the 25th WEN chapter, which is WEN Northern New England, which includes Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire, with 4 incredible, wonderful women. And so we've been working on that. But then I'll say I am moving to South Carolina in a couple of months. And I did use WEN and the Carolinas chapter to get a wonderful real estate agent that I'm talking to next week. So I already have friends down there and I have connections and it's great.
I think that's the fun part about WEN is we are everywhere, especially in North America. Hopefully, eventually we'll get overseas and we'll see that. Beth, what about you?
I'm kind of similar to Victoria. When you said 20 years, I'm like, that's a while ago. I'm like, nope, that's my first WEN event. It's probably 20 years ago. I went to a luncheon downtown. One of our senior leaders, one of the few female senior leaders, was being featured. And so a bunch of us went to just kind of support her. She did not need the support. It was a huge event. It was great. But at the time I was traveling 9 months out of the year and it wasn't conducive to joining. I was doing grad school at night and on the weekends when I wasn't, it was just too much going on. And so I never joined. I went to some events, but didn't join. When I moved from Houston to the New York City area in 2018, I thought, okay, let's see what this chapter is like locally. And it's so interesting to see the makeup of the chapters and how it differs. When I was in Houston at the time, I felt like the chapter, it had a lot of technical, like what I consider geophysicists, geologists, a lot of engineers, which was really cool. Supply chain professionals, accountants. But up here, our chapter is more focused on finance and legal, for obvious reasons. And it was just interesting to see that dynamic. Well, I went to one event and then COVID hit. And I signed up to be a mentor at that event. And I thought for sure, so much is going on, right? I'm like, surely they're not going to have mentor programs during COVID. We did. And it was amazing. And I think that's what pulled me in. It was nice to have these colleagues that were a little bit more than a colleague because you could be honest about sharing your experiences in the workplace or just in general. And the way the mentor program is set up, that it's circles, I really enjoyed that format. So I had a peer, we were the mentors, we had mentees, but everyone learned from one another. And it was just a really unique experience. And of course, as soon as we were allowed to have events again, it was like gangbusters. But it's funny, I've joked with Maggie and Cara before, I spent, 10 months knowing these people, and then you meet them and you see how tall they are. And you think, oh, I should hug them. Oh, wait, we've never met in person, but you already had these connections, which was amazing. I met Cara, it's only been last year. Like it seems longer than that, but I met Cara at the transition meeting. So I was the outgoing president. I brought the incoming president with me. It was in Houston, and I wasn't even sure that I could make it. And, I was in and out in like 30 hours or something, but it was such an amazing event to be able to just meet all of the other chapter leads and share stories. My table was from all over. And we shared all kinds of interesting learnings. I think New York City, it's not one of the biggest chapters. It's growing, and we're kind of like Maggie indicated, we're spread out. People are in New Jersey, they're in Connecticut, they're in New York. So they're not necessarily in Manhattan. And I think it can be challenging to get events. So we really learned from a lot of the other chapters and just came back with a lot of learnings. When Cara talked about the podcast, I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And now, lo and behold, I'm helping out with the conference. I cannot wait for the conference next year in April. So I'm already plugging it. It's not even out there yet. But it's just really rewarding to see how all of these local chapters continue to grow. And you can see people's careers evolve and grow as well.
So apparently I've also learned recruitment through the WEN organization, because I'm volunteering or recruiting people, or it's like I planned that meeting to reconnect all of the different leaders of the chapters that Beth was talking about. So Victoria, I think that everyone brings everything together.
I think so. Well, and what I think is interesting from everybody's story about WEN is just the diversity that exists inside of WEN, right? When you think about the types of work that people do, but also, again, I think 20 years ago when I first got introduced, it was all about oil and traditional energy. And obviously today, with the energy transition and just the different interests that parties have, it's about more than petrochemicals and petroleum. It's batteries and solar and wind and other things. And I think that will just continue to help WEN and its members evolve. I know that the WEN podcast started in 2020 with the Denver chapter, and it's really grown and expanded from there. Can you guys share how it's developed and how you actually came to be the hosts? Because that's also a recent thing for you.
I think I can take a jab at least the origins of it, and then Beth and Maggie have already alluded to how they became the host because of my spectacular recruitment skills, apparently, through the WEN organization. Podcast host back in the day was Sally Hallingstad. She was the WEN Colorado president, and she was rolling onto the board of directors at WEN Global. I was programs director going in to be the president-elect of WEN Global, and we started chatting and we said, you know what? We think that the podcast shouldn't just sit at the Colorado or the Denver area, right? It really should be much more about what is the energy market as a whole. They kind of did their thing locally. Still a lot more to untap there, as you guys will see in upcoming episodes of the WEN podcast. But we wanted to get voices from other chapters involved as well. We brought it up to WEN Global. Sally was still the host. Eventually, she realized that she wanted to have more voices come in. So it started out where other people were hosting podcasts. She was there more as a facilitator. But what we started to realize when we had multiple hosts throughout the year, like guest hosts, we lost the connection with the people that were hosting it. So we decided then that Sally would be the host and she'd bring in two co-hosts. So the three of them, it was Sally, Sarah, and Sarah, started talking about not just the people in energy, which is really the focus to begin with on the podcast, but also, like you said, the technologies, what's coming next, focus on maybe the leadership trends that were happening out there. So we had kind of three different genres: the journeys, the leadership trends and the technologies that were evolving. And last year, they did all of their hosting, Sally, Sarah, and Sarah, and they were super excited, but almost all three of them got new jobs in the last year. And so they said, you know what, it's time for us to step back. We're a little burned out. I was going into past president, and I said, you know what? I love talking to people. I want to stay connected with WEN, but I don't necessarily want to run the organization anymore. And I also don't want to do the recordings and do the editing and all of that. So I was like, I need people on the journey with me if I want to continue this podcast. I think it's something that we've all fallen in love with at WEN. I asked Maggie because we were already remotely connected. Like I said, at the leadership transition meeting last year, where each year WEN has a brand new set of leaders come in. So the leaders of today will not be the leaders of 2024. Some of them will stay, but most of them will rotate off. So about a half of the leaders rotate off every single year for every single board that we have. And so we're here to give a little bit of consistency and bring together the stories of all of the different chapters that we have out there. And Beth was able to raise her hand to bring a different perspective. We wanted 3 totally different people who got along, and we started doing that. Beth, Maggie, do you guys have anything to add? I think that was pretty much the whole journey, besides maybe why you guys decided to do it.
Well, I can't say no to you. So I don't even remember when you asked me. I might have been drinking that night. You're like, hey, you should do this. I'm like, sure. But it's been a blast. And, I'm doing all the editing for it, which I didn't know how to do before. But now, like, it's another new skill set. It's been fun. And then I got to know Beth. I didn't know Beth prior to this. And then she was up in Boston for a meeting. So we went out for Palermo's or Palomas and purse cheese and just had a blast. But, WEN is just about meeting new people and doing things with them, and I think we've done a great job. It's been really fun.
One thing that I think that has drawn me to this after meeting with Maggie and Cara and just kind of understanding our different points of view and our different experiences, I've said this before, I'm attached to this for selfish reasons. I mean, it's great, working with and learning from Maggie and Cara, but also all of our guests. I have this selfish intrinsic need to ask a lot of questions. They're patient with me, but I really want to connect the dots. We keep talking about how vast the energy industry is. I mean, petrochemicals are part of that for sure. And I think that we really need to have a more coordinated effort. We need to have more transparency, understand the roles we play. And I really think this podcast, I hope, gives us the opportunity to do that. So that's why I stick around.
Were you guys podcast listeners before you jumped onto the WEN podcast train?
Yes, but the podcasts that I listened to were guilty pleasures, and apparently were only teaching me how to take over the world because they had to do with like dictators in history and stuff. So,
oh, you mean
other podcasts?
So
yes,
people that are very good at voluntold and voluntelling.
Yes.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
I do listen to other podcasts, but as soon as Cara talked about the podcast, I started listening to it before I even knew there was opportunities to join in. But yeah, I got to say it's probably not too many, but I really liked the format too, that there was all these different perspectives.
Absolutely.
What about you, Victoria? What made you start the chemical show? Because it's a lot of work for one person. Like we're a lot of work with 3 people. How is it with you?
One person.
Well, so I have a team that helps me. So that's the good news. But I started listening to podcasts like 5 years ago. I remember the first time somebody told me that they listened to a podcast was my brother-in-law. And he talked about how he listened to this sports podcast every day on the train ride home. And I'm like, what the holy heck are you talking about? Like, who does that stuff? All of a sudden, I became one of those people that does that stuff, not the daily podcast, but I started listening to podcasts when I was driving to clients and stuff and really fell in love with the medium. So podcasting is so personal. It's personal. It's the opportunity to really connect and a lot of storytelling. And I saw where its potential was. I wanted to get started and I wasn't really sure what it's going to do. But then in a moment of clarity, so I was literally on a walk listening to a podcast. I don't know which one. In November of 2020, I was on a goal setting retreat with my husband. And it really came to me. I'm like, let's just keep it simple. The Chemical Show. I got back to our hotel room. I bought the website immediately. 3 days later, I had a conversation with one of my business mentors who got me introduced to a production company. And away we go. It just is something that what I think is we're at the front end of a new media. a very personal media. And with podcasting, we have the power of storytelling. For me personally, when I think about the voices in the industry, and I think this is true for the When podcast as well, we're able to bring voices into podcasting that aren't getting playtime on regular media or industry media or, anywhere. So it's this opportunity to tell different stories, share different insights. There's, thousands of companies in energy and chemicals, many of whom people don't actually know about. And it's an opportunity to tell those stories.
Opportunity to put a face to the industry, like many faces, okay, virtual faces, at least a voice to the industry. Maybe we'll leave it at that with the podcast.
Yeah.
But also, like you said, the storytelling, it humanizes the energy industry. And as we transition to the future of energy, whatever it is, wherever it goes, there's going to be controversy, there's going to be conflict, there's going to be growing pains, there's going to be solutions that are provided that everybody needs in their everyday life. But what this does is it shows that there are real people behind these decisions that are trying to do good in the world and trying to balance all of these risks and different requirements and needs of everybody in the entire world.
Yeah.
I think
I
that's
agree.
fun.
I'm going to turn this. What's been something interesting or insightful? Maggie, maybe let's start with you. What have you learned from the podcast?
Episode 52, we had Julie Brown on for Mastering Your Network. And, we always end it with, what do you want the listeners to know? And she comes out with, you know what? I'm not an avocado and neither are you. And what she was talking about is that we don't in our careers ripen for a set amount of time and then just wither away and brown, right? Like she had pivoted her career, later on in life and has a great new career as a keynote speaker. And we all can have that. And I, especially I've been through changes, I've been through health changes, things like that. And I've been able to pivot, being a jack of all trades, be able to get into a different industry, a different company, into a different role and be successful despite those changes. So I'm not an avocado and neither are any of you.
That's awesome.
That's our new mantra. I am not an avocado.
Right? Beth, I'm curious what you've learned.
Okay, you stole my favorite, so that's fine. That's fine. I'll get a little bit more. I mean, I do feel like, and I don't want to come off like I'm just hearing what I want to hear, but I feel like a recurring theme we address across several episodes, as we think about the energy transition that Cara brought up, is that we need to use creative solutions and seize opportunities. When we think about the energy transition, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of risk. People think it automatically means increased cost. And, they don't understand what the regulatory landscape might look like. But I think if we think about opportunities, that's this common theme that we've heard throughout several of our episodes. So just case in point, there's clearly a desire to move toward electrification. We hear about that constantly, right? In 2030, you can't buy an ICE vehicle in the UK. It's moving forward. It is, regardless of what you think about. But we need cleaner energy sources to electrify. We need to boost up our infrastructure for sure to have any success moving forward in that direction. And so during our batteries episode, our Batteries Make Good Neighbors episode, Emma talked about the current state of battery tech and how they're getting creative with the siting solutions for batteries, because they need to think about, when they're implementing these projects, how are they going to provide services to the grid, to a customer, to the market in general? And when you think about it from that angle, it makes the economics a lot more appealing from an investment standpoint. It's not necessarily that the technology is improving for sure, but when you think about just at a very high level, it's getting creative with just some simple solutions. It's not a big changes that need to be made. I mean, we talked about this in our real decarbonization episode as well with Katie Bays. So I know there's some skepticism around it. We don't fully understand it. It's still early days after the IRA here in the United States. So we're not really sure how we will truly realize some of those incentives, how that might play out in the market. We do feel like investors are still having cold feet with some of these newer technologies. So I guess I shouldn't just say getting creative, but it's also being optimistic. I feel like, no matter how we talk about some of these really hard issues to discuss or understand, I truly feel like each of our episodes, I come away feeling optimistic about the future, which is nice. We keep talking about having the right people at the table, the right people as part of the conversation, highlighting those views. That's another thing that Tisha Schuler reiterated in our real decarbonization episode, that it's having the right people at the table and having their voice heard, so that we can have a collaborative effort to have these discussions around how do we think about this differently and move forward. We know how to do it. We just need to think about it differently, more creatively. And there's some unrealized opportunity there. So I sound like Pollyanna.
I think there's two pieces to this for me. One, tying in with what Beth is talking about with ESG and energy transition and just sustainability in general. I think one of the things that's come through is that the industry, energy and chemicals and downstream, needs to own the narrative, right? So we are far more efficient, effective, carbon reduced, I'm going to use that as a phrase, than we were 20 years ago. We just haven't told people very effectively about that. So I think we're caught in a bind of our own creation. So that's one piece. But the second piece is what I found is interesting is individuals, people that are listening to the podcast are really and truly genuinely interested in how other leaders got where they're going. And they're curious and they're interested in the stories behind that. And so there's this example of a private equity owned company, a leader that I talked to, who he actually shared how he got to the business that he was in, that he with the PE company had bought. And he had interviewed something like 30 different private equity firms to find one that was a good match for what his vision and objectives and stuff were. And a colleague of mine from Shell had reached out and is like, oh my gosh, that was great. I did not know that was how people did this, right? Or at least it was just the power of the personal example. And so I think that comes through loud and clear. Interesting pieces, that individual who had reached out to me and said, hey, I didn't know that you could do this, is now leading a privately held company inside a major corporation, but still he used some of those lessons to get where he wanted to go. And that opportunity wouldn't have been there had we not had the podcast and had the opportunity to ask this leader to tell a story. So it's just kind of cool.
That is cool. One of the things that I've really liked plays off of what you just said is learning from the podcast and taking it. For me, I really wish people understood that there's a huge pool of untapped talent out there that people just may overlook because on a piece of paper, they haven't been actively working in the last 2-3 years. They took a career pause because of family, because of moving, because of whatever it was. Maybe they just had a challenging time after reductions in force, right? Everything like that. Anna McKay and what she's doing at Parents Pivot is amazing work. She actually coaches and helps people get prepared to come back from career pauses. Funny story is after we held that episode, I was actually in the interview process. I was trying to hire people, and I had 3 people that probably would not have made the slate before, but we were making sure to be very proactive on who we were allowing through, at least for first interviews. And most of the people made it to like the second or third interview when we got around to it. But these were people who were talented that had not worked for a few years. And a couple of them, I even connected over to Anna afterwards because I only had one position, but I had to make the selection. And these people are talented, and you can tell that they use either their engineering skills or their business skills or their multitasking skills every single day. And it was funny because I remember my boss asking me, why do we have so many people that have been out of work? Like what in the interview slate? So that was his question. Glad he read the resumes ahead of time, right? Because a lot of people walk into interviews not necessarily as prepared as they could be. And I said, you know what? I'm trying something new, and I'm just keep a very open mind in interviews because these people have different sets of skills that we are trying to do, and they want to work, period. They want to work.
And so refreshing.
Yeah, it is refreshing. And the talent that's out there, I was surprised. Like I said, I immediately went in to try it. My talent recruitment team was on board with it. And being able to connect the people to a tool after the fact to an organization like Parents Pivot was fun too, because at least then it could see that I was genuinely interested in what they did and their success, even though I can only hire so many people. But at the same point, if I could have hired them all, why not? Right?
Yeah. I think it's interesting. So my assistant actually, when I hired her, she had been a stay-at-home mom for more than a decade. Great skill set and background before she said, "Hey, I need to take a pause." And so I was able to bring her in, and that was good. But I think the other piece that it's really easy for us to forget rather, the effects of COVID. I think we've already forgotten how people had to stop working because their kids were home, right? Depending on what part of the world you live in, your kids weren't going to school. Somebody needed to be managing household. Maybe your job required you to be in person, or maybe it required you to be home. Jobs were lost, lives were changed. We went through this turmoil 2 and 3 years ago. And now today it's kind of blue skies and it's easy to forget. And yet I think there's probably a lot of people in the job market who have gaps, COVID related gap, not
Yeah.
just all the other gaps that have happened.
Exactly. And I think we're starting, so there are impacts. So we were forgetting. Yes, I 100% think we're forgetting. I remember I've been to the airport in different sections over the last year. And it's funny, each time I go, I think the last time I saw one person in a face mask, whereas like 6 months ago, I still would have seen about 30% of people in a face mask. So little things are changing daily on that may or may not be visible to you. But also, I think how our companies operate are changing. And this goes to, I think, the risks that our companies are seeing and dealing with every single day. Yes, we've got like the supply chain, whole fiasco of 2022. We've got inflation, we've got logistics all over the place. And those were identified top 5 priorities in what we did with Protivity. They surveyed a bunch of energy and non-energy leaders in industry as a general, and those were 2 of the risks. But the other 3 risks were all associated around culture. So I think that that's something that's really interesting because we see it. I think everybody is talking about culture, positively, negatively, social media, not social media, news, politics, it doesn't matter. Everybody is trying to normalize culture. The normalization isn't necessarily happening in the same direction for every single person, right? What's normal to me is not normal to you. I don't think, there's nothing to say what's right or wrong or anything like that. But I do believe that companies with strong cultures, strong missions and visions are the companies that are starting to thrive because they're getting employees that are in line with their mission, with their vision. They can live the same cultural values as what their company is. And I think that's really important, and it will remain being important moving forward. I think that that's something that we all need to be aware of, and I'm glad that we talked about it. But one of the things I wanted to talk about and pivot the conversation to is, what topics do you guys want to raise awareness on, right? Like for me, risk is not just about profit anymore. It is also about how we set up our companies and what is the culture that we're portraying out there. What about you, Beth? What topics are you seeing that you want to raise awareness on that are kind of the trends out there right now?
I just like hearing Cara talk about risk more because I'm a risk nerd. But beyond that, I think that I feel like I'm harping on this issue, but we keep bringing up this idea that industry-wide decarbonization is only going to be possible through collaboration. And I think that we need to have really good engagement with all of our stakeholders. So, there's one thing to say that oil and gas should decarbonize. But, when we talked with Tisha and Katie on our decarbonization episode, we talked about all the different sectors, getting them involved. We've heard of co-sectoring, maybe in Europe, where they think about how do they decarbonize, and, energy is co-sectoring with transportation to think about a holistic strategy to move forward. But I think it's having those right players in the conversation. It's understanding the communities in which you operate. It's not just oil and gas, it's power. It's petrochemicals, it's transportation, it's all of those tangential service companies that support these sectors as well. And I think really understanding the role that industry plays, what energy does, what it can do, and then providing that transparency, I think is going to be the only way to move forward any kind of energy transition in a meaningful way. It's akin to the Industrial Revolution. When's the last time we did something that was this macro level, this coordinated, I'm not saying the Industrial Revolution was very coordinated, but I mean, just think about the long-term implications. We've never tackled a problem like this before. And I think the only way to move forward, it's not just oil and gas. It's not just traditional energy. However you define traditional energy, it's understanding all the different market players and changing behavior and at a very strategic level. And then involving everyone in the conversation. So it's not going to be done through one unilateral, change in one sector. It's very collaborative. And I think that's one thing that I really want people to understand. It's much more collaborative than that. I think it's not just picking on, the big bad oil companies. I'm an advocate for the good that they do and the opportunities that they seek as well. So
I have a bit of a contrarian view to you, Beth. I think the hidden risk is the law of unintended consequences. My biggest concern is that we as a industry, as a country, as a Western world, are chasing answers without understanding the negative effects of those solutions that come with it, right? So case in point, if you think about airplanes and airplane travel, 20 years ago, when all of the airlines switched to plastic liquor bottles on the plane. So, it used to be those little airline bottles of gin or whiskey or whatever it is that people would get that would be were served in glass. And they switched it to plastic and saw a huge reduction in emissions and in fuel, right? So tremendous fuel savings because it went much lighter. We now have this push towards, well, let's get rid of plastic on the plane and go towards metal and glass. So because of the negative perceptions of plastic. So I think, and so then all of a sudden what happens, we start consuming more fuel again. So I think understanding not just the point, but the life cycle effects and the hidden risks and is really critical, because I feel like in some ways we're jumping to solutions without understanding what the real problem is. So that's one piece. So that's my contrarian view to you, Beth.
No, I don't think that's contrarian. I think
good.
I think that's important to highlight because we don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul. We don't want to push the problem down the road. And we have talked about this before, a circular solution where you understand the full life cycle. And then, electrification, I don't think it's the answer necessarily. That's the market we're in right now.
I mean, like, where's the electricity coming from, right? I mean,
thank you. I wish people on the podcast could see all my hand motions.
I know.
But yes, on the nose, I agree with
videos.
you.
But the other piece, I think the other trend that's emerging, and I think people are becoming aware of it, is the effects of the aging China demographic on demand and market assumptions, right? So in my adulthood and most of my career, China has been the growth market, and it's fueled growth from petrochemicals, for energy, for fuels, for consumables, et cetera. However, and we see this in the news today, China is driving off a cliff, and that's not really the right thing, but China's population is aging dramatically. Their demands are decreasing, and it is not the growth engine that it once was. So John Richardson from ICIS, his episode 102 is a great one, where we talk about the effect of this aging China population and what it's going to do on markets. And I don't think we've come to grips with that, because what it really tells us is we don't need as much stuff as we used to. And we're in a world that's geared up for a lot of production and not less production. So it's going to be interesting to see where this goes.
I go back to the Risk is a Dirty Word podcast we had with Ashley and Leslie. What was interesting there for me is that there was 3 words they used in one conversation that I've never heard before. One was agile, one was innovation, and one was risk. And I'm thinking, I've never heard those 3. Usually one's against the other, one's against the other. But, when you're talking about life cycle of products, life cycle of the customer segments and the aging, populations and things, when you think about innovation, sometimes you don't get to do that, right? And what Ashley had kind of defined innovation as doing something different. And then she talked about using agile to be able to implement change quickly. So we know we need to do something different. We need to be able to implement it quickly. And that then reduces the risk in certain situations. So it's interesting. There's like common threads and different things that we've brought up that we've learned, but it's all about, considering that whole picture and being able to implement change quickly amongst any of those spokes in those wheels that might change or might cause a difference. As you know, one of our pillars for this podcast is leadership skills and trying to bring in some things that our listeners can do in terms of leadership and being better people ourselves. And I was thrilled we were able to get Terry Trespicio on for one of our episodes from Who to You. Terry was my writing instructor for a long time. And one of the things that she taught me, it's a rule in her writing club, is to not disclaim. So you can't disclaim your work before you read it because there's a feedback process where you go through what we like, that.
And when you say you can't disclaim, what does that mean?
So something I could say is, well, I have this idea. I don't know if it's like good or not, or if I'm writing an email. You guys probably discussed this before, but it's that initial disclaiming, or you get up, oh, I don't think this presentation's really good, but she said, you don't realize how much power you have in a room if you just say what you want to say without qualifying it, right? It's not fair to you. It's not fair to your listeners to say, hey, I really suck at this, but I'm going to make you listen anyway, right? So, one of the things that we really learned from her is don't disclaim. Whether you're writing, whether you're speaking, disclaimers should only go in legal work, and that's it. So we all need to stop disclaiming. So without disclaiming, Victoria, anything in your podcast that you've learned from a leadership skill that you can share with our listeners?
Yeah, it's really the power of clarity and vision, both inside your organization and with your partners. So tying into what you talked about earlier about how it's challenging when you talked about agile and innovation inside of a company, it's challenging. Well, what's become really clear to me is that the way that we're getting to green technologies, low carbon technologies is actually through partnership, through bringing in small agile companies and partnering. And the only way a partnership really works is if you're very clear and transparent and aligned. And so it's really that power of, I'm going to tie into you, not disclaiming and owning what your objectives are and what you're bringing to the table and what you need your partners to bring to the table is really critical.
It's funny because, I had something pre-thought out for this question and I'm totally going to pivot here. So it's 100% formed in my head. We'll see how we do explaining it. Maggie, you said, don't be afraid of iterative change, of agile change, of doing that in your previous thing. Victoria, you just said it's around clarity and making sure that you're aligned on where you want to go, what you want to do. Maggie, you were talking about not disclaiming. For me, what that says is we need to foster an inclusive environment where failing is acceptable. And by failing, what I mean is we need to be able to see failures as learning opportunities. And yes, to not necessarily celebrate them, but to look at them, see how we can not do that again or be better or be able to do that. And the way that we need to do that is through having safe leadership environments. And we've been talking about a lot about this at my company, and I haven't brought it into the podcast yet, but I'm going to do it right now. Why not? Is that psychological safety of being able to allow your team to see failure in a different light and to be able to pivot and to iterate on everything that they do and learn as they go. And that's one of the most powerful things. If you can create that safety net and you can talk about not only your failures, but the failures of the team and how you guys can avoid them and get better and improve over time, what it does is it speeds up that turn and that agility and everything that happens. Your innovation becomes more and more an intrinsic part of your team when you start to do that. And it all comes back to, do you allow space for failure? And do you allow space for talking about it on your team? And I think it's really important. It's a leadership trait that I think everybody needs to invest more time in learning about, but also that we've talked about without actually putting a term to it in probably both of our podcasts, right? Making space for innovation and for failure and for everything that comes along with innovation as it goes through.
I really like that. And the thing that comes into my mind when you say this, it's risk management. So we've already talked about risk management in a different context,
Right.
but part of risk management is identifying the potential risks and what the consequences could be and how you mitigate that. And it's not just our business, but it's also our people. And my parents were really good at whenever I faced something and had my own career challenges and life challenges and other things. So like, well, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I was young and I was taking some risk. Okay, well, so the worst thing that's going to happen is you have to sell your car, you move in with your brother, and you go back to school. Like that's maybe the worst thing that's going to happen. At different points in my career, it's been different things. So I live with that to a certain degree. I am definitely a risk taker. My motto would be when opportunity knocks, open the door. And part of that is recognize, well, what's the worst thing that's going to happen?
Very interesting trick that I heard about that is don't ask the question once, don't ask the question twice. Like go to the rock bottom sometimes. And this is especially when developing people. The group that taught me it, I don't remember the name of the group, but their concept was an elevator. You're going up and down, right? And it's an emotional roller coaster and everything like that. But until you get to the ground floor of what is that base issue, that's risk, that's driving that risk, whether it's a personal behavior or a need or a value or something that's driving it, you won't be able to clearly understand why it's holding you personally back if it is around people development. So it's just something to think about is when you do those risk assessments, don't just stop at what you think is the worst. Try and go one step further because that could be the worst. And then it helps you to identify the fears that you have with that.
Well, it's your tolerance, right? What we're talking about is risk tolerance. And I think that's one thing it's difficult for me to understand because our business is inherent with a whole lot of risk and a whole lot of failure, and we're comfortable with that. And we mitigate it to the point that we're comfortable with it. Going back to the productivity conversation we had a few episodes ago, cyber risk is not high on people's radars. Why? Because they feel like it's happening all the time and they've done everything they can do to mitigate it. And they just have to tolerate that it's going to happen. And they have to have a remediation and containment plan available when it happens. But I think we just have to think about our tolerance for some of these issues. So it's not just like you said, what could go wrong? How far down does the elevator have to fall before we are just not tolerant of it falling anymore? And think of it that way. So what is the worst case scenario that we can accept, and how are we going to mitigate that? And then that can reestablish our threshold for the tolerance. I think it's just a conversation about understanding what risk we're willing to take, because you have to take, in some cases, a very risky decision in order to reap some great rewards.
I have to tell you some of the best advice I ever got from a leader, one of my mentors, and it was when I was in sales. And sales is the hardest job ever because you are in front of the customer all the time while that customer is open, right? But I was really stressed out one day, and he says to me, Maggie, what's the worst that can happen? They could kill you. And you know what, Maggie? They can't kill you. Like, murder is illegal. They will go to prison. So like, if that's the worst that can happen, like, it's not that bad, right? And I was like, Ray, I see what you're saying, but they're calling me again and it's 10 o'clock on a Friday night. But it's just best leadership.
Usually the worst thing that I tell my team can happen is they say no. So your sales leadership was a little bit different training methods than what I bring to my team.
They'll go to prison. It's illegal, Maggie. It's like, okay, I gotcha.
Like I said, sometimes you have to take it to the extreme to make it a little bit easier to understand that it's not really that bad. So, Victoria, what you may or may not know is that we like to end on a fun note every single time. We like to make sure that we let our listeners get to know us a little bit more. So we usually end with a few fun questions. The whole idea behind this is to be short, quick, responsive. We're going to go around the room and all four of us will respond to all of these questions. So each one of us ask one question and answer. And so let's do it in under 30 seconds, ladies, each, if not all together. Okay? So I'm going to start it off. If you could share a meal with anyone, living or dead, who would that be? So I'll start with Victoria.
My dad. He died almost 8 years ago. And I would love to have another meal with him.
That's awesome. Maggie.
Doug Flutie. No, hands down. Doug Flutie and Kennedy from MTV and Kennedy Saves the World podcast because she's smart. And
I was going to
it'd be
ask if
fun.
it was all at the same table, but you just
Yes.
answered that. So,
Absolutely. All day long.
Is this a Flutie hotness from his college days, or is it a
And the half
Flutie now
shirt.
thing? Or
He
what
just
is
can do
this?
everything, right? Except for Dancing with the Stars. But he can do everything that he puts his mind to, except Dancing with the Stars. He was awful on that. I still watch, but awful.
Beth, what about you?
I'm the same as Victoria, my dad.
Well, I would like to have a meal with a few different people all at the same table because I'd like to hear them all talk together. So I think that Oppenheimer, Jim Lovell, and I would like to also have one of the many different political leaders out there just all at the same table just to listen. I like hearing different points of view. I don't know which political leader. I'll throw Kennedy out there just because he was like, that's what came to mind after Maggie said that. But anyways, Maggie, what's your
Nice.
question?
What song do you sing at karaoke, Beth?
Surf, Wax America.
Nice. Victoria.
I don't have a karaoke song. Tell me your song. I might jump in and sing it with you.
All right. My song is You Can Dance If You Want to, you can leave your friends behind. Safety dance all day long. Cara?
Mine's easy because I love it. It's the Copacabana. I know it's like a very long song and everybody likes dancing to it. And I just feel like I'm singing it right now in my head. So Copacabana.
And see you dancing to it.
Have you
Yes.
heard Dave Grohl's recent rendition? It's awesome.
No, I haven't. I literally have the bass line running through my head right now because we did it
Google
in
it.
show choir. I'll have to do that. I'll have to do that.
Beth, what do you got?
Oh, if you could have a warning label, what would yours be?
Warning, contents under pressure.
Oh, that's a good one, Victoria. Maggie, what's your warning label?
Stay away, unraveling chaos.
Cara, what's your warning label?
Be prepared for sudden turns. Because I do not think linearly, nor do I speak linearly. What about you?
Oh, spicy.
Spicy. Nice.
Alrighty. Where's your next vacation? I'm going to take it a nice, fun one.
I'm going to Cape Canaveral to be an astronaut area, but no, ultimately it's just to get away from the hot of Houston to go to a different beach and be hot there.
And be very honest.
Maggie.
I am going to Charleston to look for a house.
Is that vacation though? I'm just saying.
I don't know. I'm going to probably partake in food and drink down there. Look for my golf cart with many drink holders.
What about you, Victoria?
I am going to London and Paris with my daughter.
Okay, you win. You win.
I do. It was a trip that we were supposed to take in 2020, but we all know what happened in 2020. So we're finally getting to it.
Yay. Beth?
I'm going down to Texas, see some girlfriends, just get hotter. It's fine.
It's all right. Just, tank tops and shorts and dresses, sundresses. Well,
Anyway, this has been fun.
it has been.
Yes, it
fun.
has been.
It's been a fun, long conversation, but I think we got to know each other, and I think the guests are the listeners of the Chemical Show and the listeners of the WIN podcast are both going to learn a lot about each of us and our businesses and our industry and what we do. So it's been great getting to share the microphone with each of you. So thanks for doing this.
It
Thanks,
is.
Victoria.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone for listening. Keep listening, keep following, keep sharing, and we'll talk to you again soon.
We've come to the end of today's podcast. We hope you enjoyed your time with us and want to learn more. Simply visit thechemicalshow.com for additional information and helpful resources. Join us again next time here on The Chemical Show with Victoria Meyer. A key component of the modern world economy, the chemical industry delivers products and innovations to enhance everyday life. It is also an industry in transformation, where chemical executives and workers are delivering growth and industry-changing advancements while responding to pressures from investors, regulators, and public opinion. Discover how leading companies are approaching these challenges here on The Chemical Show. Join Victoria Meyer, president of Progressio Global and host of The Chemical Show, as she speaks with executives across the industry and learns how they are leading their companies to grow, transform, and push industry boundaries on all frontiers. Here's your host, Victoria Meyer.